Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is honestly a total paradigm shift in how we think about kids growing up and interacting with the world. We're unpacking the educational philosophies of the late John Holt, specifically looking at his groundbreaking book, Learning All the Time. But here's what makes this really special. We're looking at his work through the notes of a compiler, Muhammad Nabil Musharraf, who weaves in some incredibly profound reflections on holistic, spiritual upbringing. So let's jump right in and basically rethink everything we thought we knew about education. Okay, look at this question. Sounds totally backward, doesn't it? We've all been conditioned to believe that children only learn when a qualified adult sits them down and formally teaches them something. We kind of assume a child's mind is this blank slate, or maybe even a bit deficient, just waiting for us to fill it with facts. But what if that assumption is completely wrong? What if our constant urge to instruct is actually the very thing disrupting their natural, God-given intellect? Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to cover 5 areas: education's flawed metaphors, children as natural scientists, rethinking reading and math, the parent's true role, and finally, how living is learning. Let's start with Section 1, Education's Flawed Metaphors. The compiler points out that industrial-era capitalistic thinking designed our schools for strict conformity, not actual human growth. And this is built on 3 deeply misleading metaphors. First up, the assembly line. Schools basically process students of the exact same age like uniform products moving down a conveyor belt, completely ignoring their individual readiness or interests. Second, rats in a cage. We put kids in environments where they're trained to perform unnatural tricks, like passing standardized tests, just for artificial rewards, rather than learning out of genuine curiosity. And third, the mental hospital. When a kid struggles in this rigid system, the institution blames the child, handing out disorder labels, instead of questioning the incredibly flawed treatment itself. This brings us to a huge philosophical divide at the heart of the compiler's notes. The whole industrial schooling mindset is fundamentally driven by capitalism, training a compliant workforce focused just on a standard of living, which is really all about earning and spending. But contrast that with the ethical Islamic concept of quality of life. This approach focuses on deep happiness, morality, and what's known as tarbiyah, the holistic, spiritual, and character-driven upbringing of a child. True education shouldn't just pump out a worker, it should nurture a complete human being. Moving on to Section 2, Children as Natural Scientists. Holt gives us a really stark warning about micromanaging a child's innate curiosity. He says, if we attempt to control, manipulate, or divert this process, we disturb it. The independent scientist in the child disappears. Children are literally born with a God-given desire to figure out the universe. When we force them into rigid curricula, we aren't creating intelligence. We're actively putting out that magnificent spark of inquiry they already possess. So how does this natural process actually work? Well, it mirrors the scientific method perfectly. First, kids observe their environment super deeply. Then they wonder and ask profound questions. And let's be real, sometimes those questions completely stump us adults. Next, they theorize and hypothesize to make sense of what they're seeing. And finally, they test those theories out through real experience. Our job is not to interrupt this amazing cycle with unsolicited facts, but just to provide an environment rich enough so these steps can flourish on their own. Now for Section 3, Rethinking Reading and Math. Get this, 30. That is the number of hours Holt estimates it actually takes for someone to learn the real mechanics of reading. Just 30 hours. That's basically 1 school week. But here is the catch. It only happens this incredibly fast when the child is genuinely interested, ready, and internally motivated to decode the text. Think about all those years of painful, forced reading drills in school compared to the explosive, rapid learning that happens when a child actually wants to know what a book says. So, how do we actually get them ready? Holt's advice is pretty unconventional. Stop relying solely on simplified, cutesy picture books. Instead, expose kids to authentic adult world text. He literally says they need to bathe their eyes in real print. Leave things like newspapers, road maps, timetables, and instruction manuals lying around the house. When kids see text being used seriously in the real adult world, they naturally want to unlock its secrets. And the exact same paradigm shift applies to math. Math in school is almost always taught as abstract memorization, forcing kids to memorize 3 + 2 = 5 like it's a nonsense syllable. But numbers are just abstractions of reality. We have to start with tangible reality. Let a child see that 5 physical stones can physically be separated into a group of 3 and a group of 2. It's not a boring arithmetic fact they have to memorize. It is a physical fact of nature they can discover with their very own hands. Think about fractions. Schools rely heavily on confusing pie charts and often tell kids you can't add apples and oranges. But Holt points out, actually, yes, you can. If you have 3 apples and 2 oranges, what do you have? You have 5 pieces of fruit. To add them, you just find a broader class, a common name that includes both. And that right there is the true underlying logic of a common denominator. When we explain the logic of reality, instead of the rules of abstractions, children grasp it instantly. Which brings us to Section 4. The parent's true role. We need to talk about this crucial concept, uninvited teaching. Look, we humans are a teaching species, and we absolutely love to over-explain things. But when a child hasn't asked for help, jumping in with unsolicited instruction sends a really damaging hidden double message. It subtly tells the child, you aren't smart enough to figure this out, and this is too hard for you without my help. As parents, we really have to learn to restrain that urge to lecture. There's this incredibly powerful metaphor shared in the text from E.F. Schumacher. An old shepherd says, don't count the sheep or else they won't thrive. It's profound because when we constantly measure, grade, and test children, we turn them into abstract numbers. We lose sight of their unique, individual, living vitality. We stop looking at the actual child right in front of us and start obsessing over the data, which just crushes their spirit. So instead of testing, our role is to cultivate the right environment. The text outlines 4 vital conditions we should provide at home to let a child's natural intellect flourish. First, abundant time to explore without a ticking clock. Second, comfortable leisure, removing the anxiety of constant productivity. Third, personal freedom to choose what they engage with. And fourth, an absolute lack of pressure. Genuine discovery just cannot happen under the threat of failure. And part of having a lack of pressure means learning to hold our tongues. Holt notes that if a visiting foreign diplomat made a grammatical error in English, we wouldn't correct every single word. That would be terribly rude. Yet we do this to children constantly. Correcting every little mistake is a breach of courtesy that completely shatters their confidence. We have to let them make mistakes. They will naturally self-correct through continued exposure and experience. Finally, Section 5. Living is learning. The source emphasizes a stark contrast here. School-bound education artificially separates learning from the family unit and daily life, which creates massive anxiety. But true learning, holistic tarbiyah, recognizes that education simply cannot be divorced from daily existence, family bonds, and spiritual upbringing. Kids learn from the work we do, the way we manage household finances, the places we travel to, and the ethics we display every single day. Holt leaves us with this beautiful realization. The one thing we can be surest of is that children have a passionate desire to understand as much of the world as they can. We don't have to force them to learn. We simply have to give them access to the world, respect their process, and fully trust the incredible intelligence they were born with. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder. Knowing what we've covered today about the brilliance of natural learning and the real pitfalls of forced instruction, how will you step back, trust the process, and change your own home environment to nurture the natural learner in your life? Take a look around your living room tonight and ask yourself how you can make the world more accessible to them without getting in their way. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.